There is a kind of pain that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't scream. It doesn't slam doors. It doesn't leave bruises you can point to. It just arrives. Quietly. Like cold air slipping under a door you didn't know was open. And one morning you wake up, roll over, look at the person lying next to you, the person you chose, the person you built a life with, the person whose coffee order you've memorized, whose laugh you could pick out of a crowded room, and you realize you have no idea where they've gone. They are right there. And they are somewhere else entirely. That is the story you're about to hear. And I promise you, by the time it ends, something inside you will shift. Stay with me. His name is Grant Mercer. 46 years old. A man who spent 18 years managing a regional chain of 14 retail stores across the Mid-Atlantic, 200 employees, razor-thin margins, and the kind of grinding, unglamorous work that turns your hair gray before your time. He is not dramatic. He is not theatrical. He is steady, methodical, the kind of man who shows up, to work, to his marriage, to the hard conversations, even when showing up costs him something. For 21 years, he showed up for Naomi. And for the last 2 months of those 21 years, Naomi had stopped speaking to him. Not because she was angry. Not because they had fought. Because she was done, and hadn't found the right moment to tell him yet. This is the story of what Grant did when he finally realized that silence. A fight means someone still cares. A fight means there's still something worth defending, something worth arguing over, something worth saving. But the deliberate, cold, chosen kind of silence? That means the decision is already made. You are simply the last to know. Grant Mercer lived in that silence for weeks before he understood what it was. He and Naomi met when he was 28 and she was 25. She was working as a marketing coordinator for a hotel group downtown, sharp, funny in a dry way he loved, with a presence that filled whatever room she walked into. They married 3 years later. No children. That conversation had never quite landed anywhere solid. For a long time, Grant thought that was fine. For a long time, Grant thought a lot of things were fine. Then, about 2 years ago, something shifted. At first it was small. The kind of small you explain away, because explaining it away is easier than facing what it might mean. She stopped asking about his day. She started spending evenings in the spare room she'd claimed as her office, door closed, headphones on, phone screen always angled just slightly away from him. When he knocked, she'd open the door with the look you give a salesman who rings the doorbell at dinner time. Tolerant. Barely. Grant gave her space. He told himself she was stressed, that work was overwhelming her, that people go through seasons, that marriages have winters. Then the real silence started. Not the comfortable kind, the soft, easy quiet that settles between two people who've been together long enough not to need words. This was something else. Something colder and more deliberate. He'd say good morning and get a nod. He'd offer coffee and she'd already be pouring her own. He began to feel, slowly and unmistakably, like a roommate she hadn't gotten around to evicting. He tested it one Tuesday morning. Sat across from her at the kitchen table while she scrolled through her phone and simply waited. 30 seconds. A minute. She never looked up. He said her name, clearly, calmly, Naomi. She tapped something on her screen, set the phone face down on the table, and walked to the sink to refill her glass of water. No response. Not even a flinch. That night, lying in the dark staring at the ceiling, Grant wasn't angry yet. Anger came later. What he felt was something quieter and worse, like he was being slowly, deliberately erased. His closest friend, Curtis, had noticed too. They'd been friends since college, the kind of friendship built on years of shared history and the particular ease of a man who sees things without making them a production. A month into the silent treatment, Curtis pulled him aside after a backyard cookout and said quietly, "You good, man? You and Naomi seem off." Grant told him they were fine. Old habit. What he didn't tell him was that he had started watching Naomi more carefully. The late evenings. The way her phone screen always tilted slightly away. The faint smell, once, twice, of a soap that wasn't hers. Wasn't his. Small things. The kind of things you notice when someone has stopped bothering to hide them. And that was what rattled him most. She wasn't hiding anymore. Not because she'd gotten careless. But because she'd stopped caring whether he noticed. Their 21st anniversary was 3 weeks away. Grant had already made a reservation at Carmen's, a corner booth, quieter, the kind of spot where a couple could actually talk. He held on to that date like a lifeline. Like maybe the occasion itself would break something loose, and they'd find each other again. He upgraded the table. Told himself it was a gesture. Look, Naomi. I'm still here. I'm still trying. The morning of their anniversary, he woke early and made her coffee exactly the way she liked it, half CAF, 1 sugar, a splash of oat milk. He set it on her nightstand and went downstairs to let her sleep. By the time she came down 40 minutes later, she picked it up without a word and took it to the couch, her phone already buzzing. He watched her from across the room. She was smiling at whatever she was reading. He looked back down at his newspaper and said nothing. That evening, she wore the dark green dress he'd always loved on her. For one brief, stupid moment, driving to the restaurant in silence, he felt something almost like hope. It didn't last. At the table, she gave him 3-word answers. She looked out the window. She ordered the salmon and ate it the way you eat a meal you're waiting to be done with. When he finally leaned forward and said, directly, quietly, Naomi. Can we actually talk? Not about logistics. About us. About what's been happening in this house for 2 months, she looked back at him with an expression he couldn't quite name. Not angry. Not guilty. Tired. She said she needed space. He told her he'd been giving her space until he'd nearly disappeared into it. She said she didn't want to fight on their anniversary. And in that moment, studying her face, the absence behind her eyes, the way she was already somewhere else, Grant understood something he hadn't wanted to understand. She wasn't avoiding the conversation. She was past it. They drove home in silence. She was asleep, or performing sleep, before he finished brushing his teeth. He stood at the sink for a long time, looking at his own reflection. The next morning, he heard her voice carrying from the spare room. The door wasn't fully closed. He wasn't listening on purpose. He was just there. But her words reached him anyway, carried in a tone he hadn't heard from her in months, light, almost amused, like she was recounting a mildly entertaining inconvenience. He keeps trying, she was saying. A soft laugh. He actually upgraded the table. I almost felt bad. Almost. A pause. Then quieter, I know. I know. It's just not yet. I have to figure out the right time. Grant set the spatula down on the counter. Slowly. Deliberately. Then he walked to the back door and stepped outside into the morning air. He stood there for a long time, listening to a dog barking somewhere down the block, watching 2 birds argue in the oak tree at the edge of the yard. He keeps trying. She almost felt bad. He went back inside. He sat at the kitchen table. He pulled up his banking app, something he usually left on autopilot, and started scrolling. What he found made him stop. Over the past 3 months, there had been a series of transfers. Not huge amounts individually, 200 here, 350 there. But consistent. Regular. Always to the same external account he had no login for. He took screenshots of every transaction. Sent them to his personal email. Then he put his phone down and stared out the kitchen window at the oak tree in the yard. And Grant Mercer, patient, steady, still showing up. Grant Mercer made a decision. He was done waiting. It was time to pay very close attention. That he spent the next 2 days moving carefully. Not emotionally, he'd already made a kind of peace with the emotional side of things, or at least set it in a corner where it couldn't interfere with clear thinking. He moved carefully in terms of information. He didn't confront Naomi. Didn't mention the phone call he'd overheard. Didn't bring up the bank transfers. He went to work, came home, said the usual nothing, and watched. She was more relaxed than she'd been in months, lighter, almost easy in the way she moved through the house. And that told him something important. When a person stops worrying about being caught, they stop being careful. On Wednesday evening, Curtis called, dinner Thursday, just the two of them, a place they'd been going since their mid-30s. Burgers, cold beer, whatever game was on. Comfortable in the way only old friendships get. Grant hadn't told him yet how bad things had gotten. He'd been vague the last few times Curtis asked. But that night, sitting across from his oldest friend with the noise of the bar all around them, something in him gave way. He told him everything. The anniversary dinner. The phone call the next morning. The bank transfers. Curtis listened without interrupting. His jaw got tighter the further Grant went. When he finished, Curtis sat back and rubbed the back of his neck. Grant, man. I'm sorry. That's a lot. I'm past sorry, Grant told him. I'm in information gathering mode. I need to know who she's talking to. Curtis nodded slowly, staring at his beer. Then something shifted in his expression, a hesitation. What? Grant said. Curtis looked up. I don't know if this is anything. I don't want to throw someone under the bus on a hunch. Curtis. He exhaled. Derek Strickland has been asking about you lately. Casual like, how's Grant doing, how's the job, are you guys still living in Millbrook? He paused. I introduced him to Naomi at that backyard thing I had in July. You weren't there. You had that regional manager conference. The name landed like a stone dropped into still water. Derek Strickland. Grant knew him. Not well, but enough. He'd come around Curtis's circle a few years back. Ran a small landscaping operation. Divorced. The kind of man who always seemed to be orbiting other people's lives without quite having one of his own. Grant had shaken his hand twice. Maybe 3 times. You think something's going on? Grant asked. Curtis looked genuinely uncomfortable. I think a married woman and a single man who keeps asking where her husband is, that's not a great pattern. Grant picked up his burger. Took a bite. Chewed. Swallowed. The bar was loud. Some team on the screen had scored and half the room reacted. All right, he said finally. Curtis frowned. That's it? That's it for now. Grant set the burger down and looked at him steadily. I'm not going to blow up my life on a hunch either. I need something solid. But this helps. He drove home that night with Derek Strickland's name sitting in his head like a splinter. The more he turned it over, the more pieces fit into places he hadn't wanted to look at before. The July conference he'd missed. The shift in Naomi's mood that had started sometime around late summer. The next afternoon, on his personal laptop, not the work machine, not anything Naomi had ever touched, he looked up Derek Strickland. Basic website. A sparse Facebook page. A public Instagram with around 300 followers. He scrolled slowly. 4th photo from the bottom. A rooftop, somewhere. Late August, by the date stamp. Derek had one arm around a woman whose face was turned away from the camera, laughing at something off to the side. Dark hair. Green jacket. A bracelet on her left wrist that Grant had paid $240 for. He sat back in his chair. There it was. He closed the laptop. Stood up. Walked to the window and looked at the backyard for a long time, the oak tree, the patio furniture he'd assembled himself 5 summers ago, the garden bed Naomi had talked about replanting that never got replanted. He waited for the rage. The white-hot, immediate fury he'd expected. Instead, what came was something colder and steadier, like a gear finally engaging after spinning loose for months. He had a name. He had a photo. And he had a lawyer meeting on Friday. Patricia Calloway's office was on the 14th floor of a building downtown. Within 20 minutes of sitting across from her, Grant understood exactly why people talked about her the way they did. She reviewed the bank statements without visible reaction, just a pen moving across a yellow legal pad, numbers being circled, questions asked in the tone of someone who had seen far worse before 9 in the morning. "These transfers," she said, tapping a column with her pen cap. "Consistent amounts. Consistent timing. This isn't impulse spending. Someone helped her set this up. What does that mean for me? It means she's been planning this longer than you think. And whoever advised her made at least one mistake. They didn't account for the possibility that you'd notice before she was ready." She looked up. How long until your anniversary would have been a natural moment for her to announce she was leaving? Grant thought about it. "A few months. Maybe." Patricia nodded. "Then you're ahead of her timeline. That matters." She folded her hands. "Here's what I need you to do. Don't move money. Don't close accounts. Don't change anything she can see. But open a personal account, just yours, and reroute your direct deposit there quietly this week. And document everything. Any communication, any absence, any unusual behavior. Dates and times." Grant was already doing that. Walking out of that building, he felt something he hadn't felt in months. Traction. Like he'd been spinning on ice, and his tires had finally found pavement. That evening, his phone rang with an unfamiliar number. He answered. The voice was immediately recognizable, easy, confident, the particular tone of a man who'd never had to work too hard for anything. "Grant. It's Derek Strickland." Silence. Grant let it stretch. "Look," Derek continued, recalibrating in real time, "I know how it looks. But I think it would be better for everyone if we talked like adults before things get complicated." Grant kept his voice completely neutral. "How did you get this number?" "Naomi gave it to me." She thought. "She gave you my number," Grant repeated. Not a question. Just letting Derek hear how that sounded out loud. "She thought it might help if we just cleared the air." Grant pulled into a gas station, put the car in park, and spoke slowly. "I appreciate the call. I really do. I'll keep it in mind." Then he hung up. He sat for a moment. Then he pulled up his voice recorder app and logged the time, the date, and what had just happened. What turned over in his mind on the drive home wasn't Derek. It was Naomi. She had given him Grant's number. She had suggested he call. Which meant one of two things: she genuinely believed the conversation would smooth things over, or she was testing Grant, seeing how much he knew, whether he'd react. Either way, it was a miscalculation. The next morning, while Grant was washing his truck in the driveway, a car he recognized pulled slowly up the street. Wendy Palmer. Naomi's closest friend. A woman who had been at their wedding, who had sat across dinner tables from Grant for years, who called Naomi her person. She parked 2 houses down and walked toward him with the energy of someone who had rehearsed what they were going to say and was already regretting it. "Grant." Her voice was careful. "Do you have a minute?" He turned off the hose. "Say what you came to say." She pulled her cardigan tighter despite the mild temperature. "I've known for a while," she admitted. "About Derek. She told me back in August. I told her she was making a mistake, but she didn't listen, and she stopped. I should have said something to you sooner. I know that. I don't have a good excuse. Grant studied her face. She wasn't performing remorse. It was the real kind, the kind that had probably been keeping her up at night. How long has it been going on? Since July. She looked at the ground. The backyard party at Curtis's. That's where it started. He absorbed that without showing anything on his face. Is there anything else I should know? She hesitated. She has an account somewhere. She said it was for starting over. A glance up. I don't know the details. I appreciate you coming, Wendy. She looked relieved and guilty at the same time. I'm sorry, Grant. For what it's worth something, he said. And he meant it. She left. Grant picked up the hose and finished washing the truck. Everything was pointing in the same direction. Naomi had a plan, a timeline, and a head start she thought she still had. What she didn't know, couldn't see, had no reason to suspect, was that her head start was gone. Grant was no longer the husband standing in the dark wondering what had gone wrong. He was the man who had already turned on the lights. That Tuesday evening, he drove to the bank and opened a personal checking account. Just his name. New routing information. New debit card. He rerouted his direct deposit from his work portal, a 15-minute process that Naomi had zero visibility into. Wednesday, he met with Patricia again. She flagged something he hadn't fully considered. The external account Naomi had been transferring money into was likely in her maiden name. Check whether she renewed her passport recently, Patricia told him. Women planning a clean exit often do. He checked that evening. She had. 8 months ago. He sat with that for a long time. Friday afternoon, Derek called again. This time, Grant let it ring. Then he opened his voice recorder, hit the red button, and called Derek back. Derek. Sorry I missed you. No problem. Trying for casual. Not quite getting there. I just wanted to follow up. Clear the air a little more. I appreciate that, Grant said pleasantly. So let me ask you something directly. How long? A beat. How long, what? How long have you been seeing my wife? The pause that followed was long enough to be its own answer. Derek started to talk, about feelings, about situations, about not planning for things to go this way. And Grant let him talk. Didn't interrupt. Didn't raise his voice. Just let him dig the hole deeper while the recorder captured every word. By the end, Derek had confirmed 3 things without quite realizing it. It had been going on since summer. Naomi had told him Grant was basically already checked out of the marriage. And Derek had been in their home on at least one occasion when Grant was traveling for work. That last one hit differently. But Grant kept his voice level. Thanks for being straight with me. I'll be in touch. He hung up. Stopped the recorder. Saved the file to 2 separate locations. Then he sat in his car in the parking garage and breathed steadily for 30 seconds. He had been in my house. Grant drove home. Changed clothes. Grilled steaks in the backyard because the evening was decent and because doing something with his hands helped him think. Naomi came outside at some point and stood near the door, watching him. Smells good, she said. It'll be ready in 10, he answered without turning around. She went back inside. He flipped the steaks and stared at the flame and thought about everything he had now. A lawyer. A recorded call. Bank evidence. Wendy's testimony. A photo from Derek's Instagram. And a passport renewal date that told him exactly when Naomi had decided she was leaving. She had built her plan brick by brick over 8 months. He had built his in 2 weeks. There is a particular kind of calm that comes to a person who has stopped panicking and started moving. It doesn't look like victory. It doesn't look like revenge. It looks, from the outside, almost like stillness. Grant Mercer had that calm now. And he wore it like armor. Naomi, watching him move through the house that week, lighter than he'd been in months, had no idea what she was looking at. She had made one mistake that people planning secret exits often make: she confused his patience with obliviousness. She confused his silence with ignorance. She had seen a man who didn't react and concluded that he didn't know. She was wrong on all counts. Naomi came to him on a Sunday morning. Not with a confession, she wasn't there yet, or perhaps never intended to be. What she came with was something softer and more calculated, a version of the woman he had married, standing in the kitchen with 2 cups of coffee already poured, sitting across the table from him with eyes that had thawed just enough to be convincing. "Can we talk?" she asked. Grant set down his newspaper. "Go ahead." She wrapped both hands around her mug, looked down at it first, a rehearsed move he recognized now in a way he wouldn't have 3 weeks ago, then looked up. "I know I've been distant. I know the last few months haven't been easy. I haven't been easy to be around." A pause. "I don't want to lose what we have. I think we need to try. Really try. Maybe counseling. Maybe just talking again, like we used to." She tilted her head slightly. "I miss you, Grant. I miss us. The performance was good." Her voice had exactly the right texture of vulnerability. The part about missing us landed with a precision that told him she knew exactly which door to knock on. 2 months ago, those words would have worked on him. He would have reached across the table, taken her hands, told her they could figure it out. But 2 months ago, he didn't know about the passport. About the account in her maiden name. About Derek Strickland standing in his kitchen. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, calmly and without cruelty, "What made you decide to say this today?" Something flickered across her face. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you've had months to have this conversation. You chose today. I'm just curious what changed." Her hands tightened slightly around the mug. "Nothing changed. I've been thinking about this for a while." He nodded slowly. "Okay." She waited for more. When it didn't come, she pressed gently. "So, can we try?" "I think we should take a few days," Grant said. "Let me think about what that would actually look like." Not a no. Not a yes. A door left slightly open, which was exactly what he needed it to be. She nodded, relieved. Reached across the table and briefly touched the back of his hand. "Thank you," she said softly. "Sure," Grant replied. And turned back to the newspaper. He listened to her footsteps going upstairs. Then he pulled out his phone and messaged Patricia. She tried a reconciliation approach this morning. Soft. Well rehearsed. I gave her nothing solid. Patricia replied within the hour. Good. Don't engage further. Let her think she made progress. We're 2 weeks from being ready. 2 weeks. Grant folded the newspaper, finished his coffee, and started thinking about the next move. That evening, he called Curtis. Told him what had happened. Curtis listened, then said flatly, "She's buying time." "I know," Grant said. "She knows something is off." Or Derek said something. That was possible. Derek's Friday phone call hadn't gone the way he'd planned, and nervous people talk. If he'd told Naomi about their conversation, she would have sensed the ground shifting and moved to shore up her position. "It doesn't matter," Grant said. She bought herself the feeling of progress. I bought myself 2 more weeks to finish what I started. Curtis was quiet for a moment. Then, with something close to satisfied disbelief, "Man. When did you get this calculated?" "When she gave me no other choice," Grant told him. And that was the simple truth of it. The doorbell rang on a Saturday afternoon. 2 short rings. A pause. One more. Frank Payne's particular habit, unchanged in all the years Grant had known the man. He set down the mail, straightened his shirt, and went to the door. Frank was 68, broad-shouldered, with the permanent squint of a man who'd spent 30 years working outdoors. Lorraine stood half a step behind him, smaller, composed, wearing the expression of a woman who had spent the drive over rehearsing something she wasn't sure she still wanted to say. Both dressed like they'd come from church. This visit had been planned. Frank. Lorraine. Grant stepped back and held the door open. "Come in." He offered coffee. Frank said yes. Lorraine said nothing. Just sat at the kitchen table with her hands folded and looked around the room as if cataloging what was still there. Frank cleared his throat. "We heard from Naomi." He chose his next words carefully. "She said things between you two have gotten bad. That you've been distant, that she's been trying to work on the marriage, and you've been resistant." Grant looked at him for a moment. Then at Lorraine. Then back at Frank. "Is that what she told you?" he said. Not a question. Just giving the words room to sit. "She's our daughter, Grant," Lorraine said quietly. "We're not here to take sides. We just want to understand what's happening." Grant stood up. Walked to his home office. Came back with a folder. He set it on the table between them, without drama, without a word of introduction. Inside, printed screenshots of the bank transfers. A copy of the passport renewal date. The Instagram photo of Naomi and Derek at the rooftop bar. A printed summary of Derek's phone call, the date, the substance, everything he had confirmed without realizing it. Frank picked up the folder. Opened it. His jaw tightened within the first 30 seconds. Lorraine leaned over to see, and Grant watched the color leave her face. Neither of them said anything for a long moment. Frank set the folder down. Looked at the table. Then looked at Grant. And what was in his eyes wasn't the protective anger of a father defending his daughter. It was something older and heavier than that. "How long have you known?" he asked. "Long enough," Grant said. "Long enough to have spoken with an attorney. Long enough to have my finances in order. Long enough to know that the reconciliation she offered me last Sunday morning was about buying time, not saving a marriage." Lorraine pressed her fingers to her mouth. "Grant, we had no idea." "I know you didn't," he said. And he meant it. Whatever Naomi's failings were, they weren't her parents' fault. "I'm not showing you this to hurt you. I'm showing you because you came to me with her version of events, and you deserve the full picture." Frank closed the folder. Pushed it slightly away. "She said you checked out. That you were never home, never present." "I managed 14 stores across 3 states, Grant replied evenly. "I've worked hard my entire adult life to provide a good life for this family. My hours aren't always easy. But I have never, not once, stopped showing up for this marriage." He paused. "She stopped showing up sometime around last July, when she met Derek Strickland at Curtis's backyard party." The name landed. Frank's expression shifted. "You know him? He came to a birthday dinner 2 years ago with Curtis." Frank shook his head slowly. "I didn't like him then. Too familiar. Too interested." He looked up. "I should have said something." "Frank," Grant said. "This isn't on you." Lorraine had gone very still. When she finally spoke, her voice was thin. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to proceed with a divorce," Grant said. "I have an attorney. I have documentation. And I'm going to make sure that what I've spent 21 years building is protected." He kept his tone steady. "I have a lot of respect for both of you. That doesn't change. But I think you should hear the truth from me directly, rather than piece it together later." Frank stood up slowly, like a man carrying extra weight on his shoulders. He reached across the table and shook Grant's hand. Firm. Deliberate. The handshake of a man who understood what he was acknowledging. Lorraine said nothing more. She reached out and briefly pressed Grant's hand between both of hers before she left. The house was very quiet after they were gone. Grant stood at the kitchen window and looked at the oak tree in the backyard for a long time. 2 weeks later, exactly as Patricia had said, the papers were filed. Grant had come in prepared. Every account documented. Every transfer evidenced. The passport. The photo. The recording. The timeline. By the time Naomi's attorney saw the full picture, the conversation had already changed. She had planned for 8 months. He had prepared for 2 weeks. And it was enough. Grant didn't remarry quickly. Didn't rush into anything. He spent the first year after the divorce learning who he was on the other side of a long silence, and what he found surprised him. He was steadier than he thought. Quieter, maybe. But clear in a way he hadn't been in years. He still manages his 14 stores. Still shows up, every long week, to every hard quarter. He has dinners with Curtis sometimes, at the same sports bar off Route 9. And occasionally, sitting across from his oldest friend with a cold beer and the noise of the bar all around them, he thinks about the version of himself who stood at the kitchen sink that night, staring at his reflection, not yet angry, not yet moving, not yet sure what was real and what he was imagining. That man trusted the silence too long. But when he finally stopped trusting it, he moved with everything he had. And that, in the end, was enough. If this story moved you, if it made you think, made you feel something, made you see your own life a little more clearly, then you already know why we do this. This channel exists for moments exactly like this one. For stories that don't just entertain, but stay with you. Stories that hold something true about what it means to love, to be betrayed, to grieve quietly, and to find your footing again. If you've made it to the end of this story, you are exactly the kind of person this channel was built for. Please subscribe to Harwick Stories. Turn on your notifications so you never miss a new story. Leave a comment below, tell us what moment hit you hardest. Was it the anniversary dinner? The overheard phone call? The way Grant handled Frank and Lorraine? Share this story with someone who needs it. You probably already have someone in mind. We read every comment. Every single one. And we will be back, very soon, with a story that will stay with you even longer than this one. Thank you for walking through the city with us tonight. Until next time, take care of yourselves, and take care of each other. When someone stops talking to you, not because they're hurt, not because they're overwhelmed, but because they have already made a choice and are simply waiting for the right moment to reveal it, that silence is its own kind of statement. It says, I have already left. I am just still standing here. The lesson is not that you should become suspicious of everyone you love. The lesson is this. Pay attention. Not from fear. Not from paranoia. But from respect for yourself. You deserve to know the truth about your own life. You deserve to not be the last person in the room to understand what is happening to you. And when the truth becomes undeniable, don't explode. Don't collapse. Don't beg. Move. Quietly. Deliberately. With everything you have. Because the people who underestimate you are always the most surprised when you finally show your hand. Grant Mercer didn't win by being louder than Naomi. He didn't win by being angrier, or crueler, or more dramatic. He won by being clear. By refusing to mistake patience for passivity. By deciding, in one quiet morning, standing at the kitchen counter with his coffee going cold, that he was done waiting for someone to tell him what was happening in his own life. The moment you stop waiting for permission to see clearly, that is the moment everything changes. Take that with you. Share it with someone who needs it. And remember, the most powerful thing a person can do, in love, in loss, in life, is simply pay attention.